All right, my name is Howard Eber, and I am an addict and an alcoholic. I welcome everybody here. As Rob mentioned, we're going to be continuing the window of opportunity, which is a method of taking the critical newcomer through the steps in 2 days. And we're going to be adding another week, a fifth week next week. So originally this was going to be a 4 week stint. We made it into 5. So we can cover 7 and 8, I'm sorry, 8 and 9 today, and then 10, 11, and 12 next week, and not have to skip on anything. So Steve is going to sit back for another week, and then we'll come and do the workshop together. Um, just by way of review, this is based on you're having a critical newcomer who's literally bleeding out on you. This is not for a new experience. This is not a shortcut. This is not an alternate to working the book, the steps through the book, word for word, line by line, because what this does is it leads into that. What we're suggesting is when you take that critical newcomer, you get them some degree of inventory and some degree of amends, and then they have some kind of enlightened spirit. And then with that enlightened spirit, they can then go through the book at a slower pace, and that window of opportunity, that window that's going to slam shut because the obsession returns, has been held up. We've buoyed it a little bit. So it is not meant to take the place of going through the book. This is not a shortcut. This is a Band-Aid. When somebody comes into the emergency room, what you're trying to do is patch them up and stabilize them before you send them up to the operating room. That's what we're doing. This is triage and qualification, patching them up, getting the bleeding to stop, and then sending them up to the operating room for the rest of the work. And the rest of the work is going through it word for word, line by line, page by page. So I emphasize that because since we've been doing this more and more, the word is getting out about it, and I'm getting people who are asking me to teach them how to do this because they want a new experience, or they don't want to take the time to go through the steps the other way. That's not what this is about. Please understand, it's not. It's a Band-Aid. That's what we're doing. Okay, where we are today is, if you've got your big book, we're on page 76. In your workbook, I guess the best place to tell you is on page 22. I'm going to put it up here on the screen in a moment, because right now I want to start on page 76. Before I go to the workbook is telling me to read something, and what it's telling me is on page 76, paragraph 3 begins with, "Now we need more action." I'll give you a minute to find that. Now we need more action, without which we find faith without works is dead. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of all persons we've harmed and to whom we're willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. Please highlight that. We made it when we took inventory. In the context of the window of opportunity, we did that. When we did our 4th step, one of the questions that was asked after we go through the columns is, did we cause harm? Did we harm that person? And we put an A or a highlight next to the name on our 4th step list. So we're going to go back to that list in a moment, but that's what we're referring to. And incidentally, since we have a little bit of extra time this evening, I just want to address this, which usually isn't in the window of opportunity. But do you ever notice that this is the only step? These are the only steps that are put together. This is the only place in the book where it says, let's do this step and this step. Everywhere else, this is the first step in recovery. Doesn't say so, but here's the 2nd step, and then here's the 3rd step. Do you ever wonder why? Well, we're going to show you why. And simply stated, it's this: the 8th step, which is a definite step in and of itself. Very often there'll be meetings that the topic is the 8th step, and what do you hear? People talk about amends. Well, that's not what the 8th step is about. The 8th step is about preparation. The same way the 3rd step prepares us for the actions of 4, 5, 6, and 7, and the 6th step prepares us for the action in 7, then the 8th step prepares us for the action in 9. It says we made a list of all persons we had harmed, and it tells us how to get ready spiritually and logistically. Logistically is sitting with our sponsor and figuring out the who, what, when, where, how, and why. And we'll get to some of that in a moment. But I just want to let you in on this point that part of the reason why the step is worded together in the book, I believe, is because part of making amends to the people we don't ever want to say anything to, we're going to put the amends in a group of nows, laters, and nevers, those sons of bitches we are never going to address. As we make amends to the nows and the laters, we become ready to make amends to the nevers. And that's why they're together, because part of making the amends prepares us for making the amends to the people we don't want to make amends to. So as we work step 9, we are preparing step 8 to make those amends that we never wanted to make. Step 9, 8, 9, 8, 9, back and forth. All right, but let's go back to the book. We made a list of persons we'd harmed and to whom we're willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal, which is 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now we go to our fellows and repair the damage. Please circle repair the damage. In a moment, we're going to define the term amends, but here's the first reference to it in the book. Bill tells us what amends mean. It means to repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris, and please highlight this sentence. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. We're sweeping away the debris. That's another definition of amends, to sweep away the debris. And it's being swept away because it's accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. It's not because of misunderstandings. It's not because of bad breaks. It's because of self-will, because we've been running the show ourselves and we run it into the wall. So that's why we're cleaning this mess up, not because of things that were done to us. Self-will run riot. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes, which is highlighted in pink because that's a prayer. That's part, the reference to step 8 is getting ready spiritually. And if we're not ready spiritually, we pray for the will to do that. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning, we would go to any length for victory over alcohol. Remember on page 58, we agreed to do that. So let's take a look, if you will, at the workbook. I'm going to put it up here. And if you need a copy of it, Rob is going to put a link in the chat. Or you could just drop me a line at thebigbookstudy@aol.com and be glad to send it to you. It's also on our website, which is, you ready for this? Thebigbookstudy.com. How great is that? How great is that? That Andy was able to come up with that one. I never would in a million years would have thought of that. But that's our website, thebigbookstudy.com. And it's also on our Facebook page. But let me bring it up here and let's talk about it a bit. If you've got the book, what I'm referring to is in that book, in the copy I'm looking at, it's on page 22. In the version that is stated for the window for the Big Book Compendium here, I think you're going to find it on page 25. Don't mean to confuse you, but depends on which workbook you have. It's the same workbook, just the numbering is a little off because of the title pages. But we're on the page that starts with step 8 and 9, okay? And what this is it shows us a few things about amends. First of all, what is amends? Now, I've got to plead guilty for 10 plus years in recovery. I was giving the wrong information. I was saying amends means to change, to indicate change. And the word amend without the S does mean that. But that's not the word in the book. The word amend, AMEND, does not appear anywhere in the first 164 pages of our big book. Not once. Not once does the word AMEND appear. It appears as AMENDS because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about amends. And what is amends? Amends means compensation for loss or injury, reparation. Amend is defined as to free from fault, to improve, to change. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about setting right the wrong. Now, Bill has given us quite a few, and incidentally, the word amends, AMENDS, appears 6 times in the big book. For those of you keeping score, because I do, it appears 6 times in the big book and 12 times in the 12 and 12. Just a coincidence, I'm sure. But let's look at what Bill says in the big book about the definition of the word amends. It means to repair the damage done in the past. Let me blow this up a bit. Repair the damage done in the past. On page 76, further on, it's sweep away the debris. On page 77, it tells us to set right the wrong, to straighten out the past, sweep off our side of the street, admit our fault, making good, and restitution. Please notice nowhere does he say change or to correct. It is restitution. Now, Bill then goes into categorization in the book. He gives us 8 categories, at least by my count. And I've been in workshops that come up with a 9th, but that's because the second one is divided into 2. The man we hate is one, and former enemies is another. I put them together because I think they mean the same thing. But whether you have 8 or whether you have 9, it doesn't matter. The point I'm trying to make is Bill gives us these categories to help us get an idea of how this is to go down. By example, it is not, I believe, it is not meant to tell us the order in which to make the amends. In fact, in the 12 and 12, Bill says to start with the nearest and dearest. And that's not where he starts when he categorizes them. The nearest and dearest are down here at the end of the list. The family, wives and parents. So in actuality, in practice, it's probably the reverse order. But nowhere does it say this is the order in which to do this. He just gives us these arbitrary categorizations, which, as far as I can tell, is the reverse order. Because the ones he tells us first, business, acquaintances, and friends, to me, those are the ones we make last. But on page 76, we start with business acquaintances and friends. And then on 77, we go further into the man we hate and former enemies, to whom we owe money, criminal offenses, including instructions on how to make amends in situations where we might wind up getting arrested, where it might cause harm to somebody close to us. How do you go about that? Because the step tells us we're not to do it when it would harm others. But if it harms us, if we do something that may send us to jail, for example, we can't avoid making that amends just because, well, gee, it might send me to jail. We have family that's dependent upon us. We can't be that bold about it. So Bill gives us instructions on how to go about that situation. And I think his advice is very sound, makes a lot of sense. And then he tells us about domestic troubles, specifically infidelity. Just infidelity, because he then later talks about wives. The very next category is wives or parents. And I'm going to change this because I wrote wives. It should be partners, partners or parents. Bill uses the word wives, but for us, it's partners. Uh, and then he talks about the family, and then he addresses rights we could never wrong because people may be dead. We can't find them. You know, you ladies have a tendency of changing your last name, which makes it a little bit difficult to track you down, but it's possible. You could do that. Um, but here's the categories that Bill gives us. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to continue. I forgot that. There's more pages to this. As we go through the book, and my suggestion is you get your book and even up, highlight each one of these. But this, again, we're doing this to get through it quickly. I'm not reading every line of every page, but I'm pointing out some of the guiding principles that are made in the book. That we go to that person in a helpful and forgiving spirit. We never criticize or argue, and we're careful not to. Their faults aren't discussed. If our matter is calm, frank, and open, we must lose our fear. We ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. And I'll show you in a moment his advice on that. We must not shrink. We place the outcome in God's hands. We have no right to involve another person. That sometimes good generalship decides that the problem be attacked on the flank rather than risk face-to-face combat, which means the instructions of the ninth step, which are make direct amends, face-to-face, nose to nose, eye to eye, sometimes have to be compromised, and we make indirect amends. Good generalship means we attack from the side, for example. If I give you a sponsee was unfaithful to his wife, but his wife had absolutely no idea. He swears by that, never any idea about it. And if he said something to her, it would hurt her deeply. So what did he do? He attacked it on the flank. His relationship was with somebody in recovery, and he formed an emotional bond with that female by talking to her at meetings. And then after a while, they talked after meetings. And then after a while, they went to the coffee shop after the meeting. And then after a while, they went out for dinner after the meeting. And before you know it, they're on dates to movies and concerts and so on. So what he did in terms of attacking on the flank is he made a commitment to never establish an emotional bond with a female in the rooms. Never. Don't sit down next to a female. Don't get intimate emotionally with that female, because that's how it started for him. That was his attacking from the flank. And to my knowledge, even though I don't talk to him that much anymore because he's in Connecticut, I believe he's very happily married and there haven't been any occurrences of that. So that's an example of attacking from the flank rather than head-to-head, face-to-face combat. A remorseful mumbling that we're sorry won't fit the bill. The step doesn't say we're there to say we're sorry. It's to make amends. There may be some rights we can't fully, wrongs we can't fully right. We don't worry about them. If we can honestly say we would right them if we could, and we don't crawl before anybody. We ask for an appointment to make that amends, ideally. Ideally, when we're doing it here in the window of opportunity, we're not going to make the appointment. We are going to call that person right here, right now, and make the amends. But when we make the appointments, if that person shuts us down and says, no, I'm not interested, I didn't like you before, I don't like you now, lose my number. That ends it. We don't keep calling back and please, I just got to talk to you, please. No, we don't crawl before anybody. We do our best, we make our attempt, it's water under the bridge. Which brings us to the next area that I think is really important. the motive, why we're here. What is it that we're trying to do when we make amends? It's a sincere desire to set right the wrong, page 77. And here's some examples of the wrong motives: to be liked, to be accepted. There's one: to be accepted. If the guy says, oh, look, I don't care for it, I don't want your amends, I just get out of my office, then that's the end of it. To be rewarded, patted on the back and complimented, and certainly not to set right their wrongs. So we always have to keep track on what is the motive here. Set right the wrong, set right the wrong, not be liked, not be accepted. Wanting to be accepted sometimes makes us crawl back again and again and again. It's not what we're supposed to do. And also on page 77, Bill tells us, besides the motive of setting right the wrong, what is the action we are taking then and there? A demonstration of goodwill. If I'm telling you that I owe you $1 million and I'm going to pay you $5 a week, it's not starting next week. Here's the first increment of that. Right here, right now, I start making those payments. And if you say, well, gee, if I owe $1 million at the rate of $5, I'll never get out from under that. So why bother? Because we owe that. We have to make right on the wrongs. We have to set right those things we've done. We have to make reparation. And if we don't start, we'll never get there. And you know what? After a while, maybe you can add to that too. But we go into it knowing I can afford this. And that's what I'm going to commit to right here, right now, while I'm talking to you. So what we're going to do, and let me get you this. Oops, sorry about that. We're going to go on a little trip. Like Dr. Bob, we're going to go, and not on a bender, we're going to go on an amender. That's what we're going to do. We're going on not a bender, we're going on an amender. Right here with the person we're working with, we are going to start making the amends. So we're going off on an amender. What I'm going to ask you to do is look at the next page. Let me get this back up here. All right, let me blow this up a bit. Okay, if you take out, and again, I'm as if I'm talking to my prospect here. If you take out your fourth step inventory that we did, we made a letter, some kind of designation for the people we've harmed. Let's start by transferring those names over. Go to your angers list, for example. Who did you harm? Well, I harmed Dad. I harmed this one. I harmed that one. We're going to start by just making a simple list here of those names. And then we're going to go back. What did you do to each of those people? Bullet points. There's not a lot of room here. Just simple bullet points. What did you do next to each name? And again, the 8th step tells us we made amends, made a list of all people, all. So that means if we don't want to talk to those people, if they're in this list, this corner list of nevers, we still have to put them down. Notice that the 8th step doesn't say we made the amends. It says we were getting ready to do that. And part of getting ready for the nevers is to do the nows, the laters, and the maybes. So let's just put a check mark next to each one of these. Which one is it? Is it a now? Is it a later? Is it a maybe? Is it a never? And if it's financial, what are we going to offer? If I'm paying $5 a week, that's what I write here, $5 per week, just so we can keep track of what it is we're committing to do. Okay? So we go through this list and we have this list of names. We have what we did. And what do we do now? Well, we pray for willingness. And what we make a commitment to do is after we do the amend or two right now, while we're sitting here, you make a commitment to continue at the rate of one amend a day until you're done with that sheet. That is not asking too much. One amend a day. And please remember, when we make the amend, besides telling them a few things, the who, what, when, where, and so on, it is important that we ask these questions at the end of the conversation. Can you tell me how this made you feel? How can I make it right? And is there anything else you'd like to say to me? All done without response. We are listening. We are taking notes to what they said. We're not responding. This is not becoming an argument. It's not a give and take. We are just talking, listening at this point after we did some talking. And what is it that we've said? Well, as a suggestion, and it's merely a suggestion, I have a kind of a script. You want to follow that while you're going to pick up that phone right here and call that first person on the list. And we're going to say, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, trying to live by certain spiritual principles, the way I believe God wants me to live. Two of those are restitution and amends, and I'm here today to make amends for the harm that I've caused you. My drinking, my using affected our relationship, and I deeply regret how I treated you, how I acted, what I put you through, whichever seems to fit. And I was wrong to have done. And then you explain what it is that you did. I stole from you. I burned down your house. I knocked over your mailbox. Whatever it is I did, I caused you great angst. With my dad, I told him, I know I cut off years from the back end of your life because of the way I behaved. That's why I'm here, to try and make right on that. So I explained the harm. And then I explained why I did it. We go back to our list. That last column, those defects. I was frightened. I was irresponsible. I was inconsiderate, irresponsible, judgmental, selfish, self-centered. This is why I did it. And my drinking, my using caused me to act in a way which has caused me great guilt and shame. And my recovery requires that I make restitution. For that person who says, no, you don't have to do that, your grandma who won't take money from you, you find a way to pay that back. You're not off the hook. We want to stay on the hook. So if one of my guys stole from his grandmother and he was convinced she didn't know about it. So what he did, since he couldn't pay her the money, she wouldn't take it anyway, was he gave to her a charity. She was a cancer survivor. So he gave to a cancer society in her name until he felt he had paid that debt. So, but what we're doing right here is we're telling the person that it caused us debt, caused us guilt and shame, and to not do so would jeopardize our recovery. So we have to do this. And then again, if we know what we're prepared to do, here's $5 for the first week. I'll be back next Monday and the following Monday and so on to pay you that $5. And then we ask the questions. How did it make you feel? Is there anything else I can do to make it right? We listen quietly. Now, before we make those amends, we talk to our sponsor. Now, if I'm doing it with you now, you don't have to talk to me, but the ones you're going to do tomorrow and the day after and the day after, you do. Before you make that call and after you make that amends, before you make that amend, and then after when you make the amends, I want to talk to you. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the list here. The first name on your list that you have under the nows. Let's say it's your father, it's your mother, it's your wife, whoever it is. Let's dial them on the phone right now from where we are. Now, we can't ask for an appointment because we're doing this in a kind of a rush job. So we're going to call that person and we're going to ask them, I'm sorry, let's get past this page. Oops, sorry. Let's leave it there for a minute. If they've got a couple of minutes for us, and we're going to make this amends to that person on the phone. It's not the ideal way. The ideal way is still face to face, nose to nose, eye to eye, but we are in a critical situation. We need to get started on the amends, and we can't put it off till tomorrow or the day after, because the new person needs to see how easy it can go down, that the things we're afraid of will disappear on us. So we need to start making that amends. And if time allows, we might make more than one sitting here. But an answer to the question that keeps coming up in the window of opportunity, how do you do the inventory? How do you do the fifth step? We've already covered that. And how do you make the amends? Here's how we do it. We start doing it now, right here. And you make a commitment to continue doing it at a rate of one a day. And you call me before it and you call me after it. So there's accountability here. That's how we make the amends. Simple. Now, if we have worked the first three steps, we've gotten right, we've gotten in harmony with God. By working 4, 5, 6, and 7, we got right in the mental dimension. We got in harmony mentally. And as a result of the 8th and 9th step, we're getting in harmony physically with the world and everything in it. You see, I believe that the book is very clear that there are 3, not 2, 3 basic dimensions of life. Bill even mentions it rather than saying there are 3. And he never says there are 3. I know there's a guy going around saying there are 2 dimensions, and he says, well, Bill never says there are 3. No, he never says there are 2 either, but he mentions 3 over and over, spiritually, mentally, physically. When we straighten out spiritually, we get right mentally and physically. Spiritual, mental, physic. 3. I count 3 there, not 2. So we have 3 basic dimensions. We've gotten right in those 3 basic dimensions. We are now walking in a fourth dimension of existence, which is the harmonious blend of those other 3. And if we want to continue to grow spiritually, there's certain things we have to do. And we're going to talk about them next week when we talk about 8, we talk about 10, 11, and 12. Right now, today, my focus is just to deal with amends. What to say, how to approach it. I'm going to stop right there. I know we have some time. This is a good time to ask some questions too about anything we've covered up until now. If you've got any questions on the inventory or the 5th step, which is what always seems to come up. But I want to leave it there. That's how we do the 8th and the 9th step.